Hello, hi, it is I, Serendipity Wyrd, here today to talk to you about magical names. A subject that is very near and dear to my heart. I have tried to record this video a couple times and I found it actually a lot harder to push myself to be really open and honest about magical name, like why I have a magical name, why that is the name of my YouTube channel instead of, say, like my legal, government, whatever you want to call it, name. And it has nothing to do, in my case, it has nothing to do with a broom closet sort of situation. People who know me in my, quote unquote real life, I don't like that sort of terminology, that's a whole nother thing, but people who know me in my non-witchy aspects, I have no problem with them knowing that I'm a witch, but we'll get into all of that and why I have a magical name a little later in this video. Right now, I want to talk about, and I've already kind of hinted at, why do some people choose magical names? I think one of the first, probably the biggest reason, has to do with this concept of the broom closet. When you are not out about your witchery, when you feel a need for some protection and you don't want the whole world to know that you are a witch, it can be really, really useful to use a pseudonym, magical name, a witchy name, another name that you go by in witchy communities, so that people who meet you as you are practicing your witchery don't know what your name is outside of that circle. Now, that obviously leads to people feeling like maybe that's a little bit untrustworthy, or maybe you're not very credible, or whatever. Those are some of my fears that come into the fact that I operate with my magical name rather than my, legal whatever name. Again, let's push me to the rear of this video, if you will, because I want to talk about you. Why do you or do you not use a magical name? I totally want to hear your reasons in the comments. I would love to have a discussion about this because I'm super curious if there's reasons that people use magical names that I haven't thought of, that I didn't think to mention in this video. So, okay, number one reason I think really has to do with like safety. Even now, as I'm filming this, we're in the year 2021. Finally got out of 2020. But anyway, and it feels like it's the super safe time that we can be all of our various identities and we can wear them loud and proud, let that freak flag fly. That's always really hard for me to say. And we're totally safe in doing so. But even now, that's not necessarily the case. People who have high level visibility sort of, there's a word that means career, occupations, that's what I'm going for, may not want everybody to know that they are witchy, or that they practice, what many would consider an alternative religion, that they are maybe part of a subculture or something like that, especially when there's so many misunderstandings about what witchcraft is still to this day, right? So if you're, like, say, a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, one of these sorts of professions, that's the word I was looking for earlier, was professions. One of these kind of professions, then it may not work for you to have everybody that you encounter in a witchy space to know you by your professional name. Let's say that instead of legal or government names, maybe it's a professional name. Because that could be detrimental to your business, to your livelihood. That is a very, very real concern. Parents also have this concern, and that may be a reason why a parent, dad, mom, non-gendered parent, may want to utilize a magical name, whether in online communities or face-to-face. Not that we have those currently, but still in covens and other sorts of circles. Because there is a real fear about, if you're a parent, your child's in school and that sort of thing, that the child will talk about your alternative religious practices. And I don't really consider that they are alternative religious practices, but that might be how the greater social, the norm thing, the cultural as a big whole sees it, you might be afraid that, your kid's teacher is gonna think that you're doing something horrific with the kids, right? Because they don't understand what your religion's all about. And you may not even see it as a religion, right? You may see it as a spiritual practice or simply a practice. I am certainly not here to tell you that witchcraft has to be religious or even spiritual. Whatever words you put around it, that's cool. You rock your words. I'm good with that. So that is kind of sums up a lot about the protection aspects of why one might choose to use a name that is not on their birth certificate for their witchcraft practices. I think that that is completely legitimate. I got stuck. Okay, so we're going to take a break here because I'm going to be real with y'all. And I have learned this thing where if I edit the video, you're not going to get the video on time. It's just not going to happen. So please bear with me while we have atrocious, maybe not well constructed stream of consciousness babbling in these videos for now, so that I actually put them up and don't get all like, I'm editing them and now I'm like, Okay, anyway, sorry. That was a total side note that has nothing to do with magical names. That goes back into the fear thing, which I talked about a couple videos ago. Magical names. Let's focus, Serendipity. So, one huge reason is for all sorts of things that come around the whole protection thing, right? You don't want people to know you're a witch. You don't, for maybe to protect your family, to protect your job, what have you. That's legitimate. There's also a very, very old belief structure that when we're talking about magic here, right? And when people know your name, then they are able to cast magic towards you, against you, negative crap coming your way. I don't necessarily worry about that sort of thing so much. I'm not saying it's not a thing. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that doesn't really factor into my practice. But that's another good reason that you might choose to use a magical name, because then if on the off chance that people decide to take magical action against you, they're putting it to like one specific portion of your identity. If you think about the name as identifying a thought form or an aspect of yourself, like a piece of your spirit, then they don't have like the whole thing, right? Because they have the part that's associated with that name. That makes sense to me. I don't know if that'll make sense to you, but there we go. So it can be sort of a defense against potential magical action taken against you. Again, I'm just throwing that out there because I'm spitballing the reasons why people use magical names other than what my personal reasons are, because I want you to know that if you want to use a magical name, that's totally, do it. Freaking do it. You don't have to choose it forever. That's the cool thing. Of course, people might be a little confused if you are, if you say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and they meet you again later, and you're like, this is my name now, and that can be confusing for people. But there are examples throughout human history of cultures, societies, places where name changes were not only the norm, but expected. We still see that in like Western culture specifically with marriages. People get married, a last name changes, typically that's on the wife side, quote unquote, like historically, women were saddled with that whole name change thing. Now it's awesome because it's legal for whoever to get married, which is freaking fantastic, and it's not this stuck to being this silly heteronormative BS. And now we approach part of where I backed away from trying to talk about names last time because I got all into the fear space. And last time, I mean in a previous recording that you're not going to see because we're doing this one now. But I got all tied up in this fear space around the fact that I also wanted to talk about names and their relation to identity. So names can help us define who we are, how we see ourselves. And in the society that I grew up in America, right? That you're given your name at birth, the parents name you, you don't have say in it. And I think it's an amazing experience and practice to do some work with that given name and figure out, does it fit you, does it not fit you. I've done a lot of work around that with myself, and that can be all sorts of interesting. But it's also super amazing to pick your own name, and it's a way to tell the world how you identify yourself. And that can go into all sorts of facets of identity. We these days are much more aware of the fact that gender is not binary, that gender is a spectrum. There are all sorts of different ways that people recognize gender in themselves and in others and all of this. And so that can be a portion of that identity, right? That's why we see, you may not consider it a magical name, but I totally view the choosing a name when you're coming to terms with some sort of space on the gender spectrum, whether you're non-binary and you want to choose a name that's maybe more fitting you, that maybe isn't heavily gendered, or whether you're trans and you want a name that's gendered, but that's gendered in the way that you see yourself. Choosing names in that way, I feel like that by itself is a magical act, because you have now put your will into the world through how you are being called, spoken to, referred to, what your freaking name is. Names are awesome. Love names. So it's the whole naming process is like this magical act as well, or can be, if you're choosing your own name or you're choosing a name for somebody else. Nicknames also are kind of this magical thing where people have, sometimes obviously they're cruel and terrible and awful, and maybe you don't want them, but I've always been kind of fascinated how we assign alternate names to loved ones and like pet names and all that kind of thing based on how we see them. That's another tangent, and I don't know if that's even relevant, but we're rolling with this because we are committed, and this video is going up today because it's almost a week late now. Okay, so identity. And so with that, there's a lot more discussion in recent months, years, about how when somebody says, hey, this is my name and this is what I want you to call me, you don't go back and pull up a name that you might have known them by, right? That's the whole concept of dead naming. That's not cool. If somebody says, this is my name now, you respect that. Or at least we hope that people do. So how does that tie in to magical names? I've seen people be really caught up on knowing what somebody's real name is, or their birth name or a previous name, and it's weird to me that there's like this obsession with that, and that you might feel like somehow you're special because and sometimes you are. That means that somebody has given you information that they've trusted you to hold. So freaking respect that. Okay, I think I'm stepping off the soapbox of like, use the name that people tell you to use. Oh, I'm so much braver in this recording, apparently. So, magical names, protection, because somebody wants to bring their identity more into the world, and so they've chosen words, names to move through the world as. I went back and read the snippet on naming in Buckland's Big Blue Book. If you've never seen this thing, hold on. It's right here. It's right here, maybe. Where's it hiding? It was right here. Yay for awkward looking around for stuff during a video. I thought I had it. Oh, it's hiding. I found it. It was right here. Okay. So, Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft. this is not a video about whether this is still a valid resource. Some people debate these things. There's some useful things in it. That's what I'll say on that for right now. We're not going to go into a whole spiel about witchcraft books, but it's really interesting because in this, part of the suggested activities is creating your witch name. And that's how it's titled, is your witch name. So what Buckland said in this book is, you are starting your life anew, in effect. Why not start it with a name of your choosing, than rather the one that was given to you by your parents and which you may not care for too much? Many witches choose a name that they feel reflects their personality or in some ways describes their feelings or interests. Names are important. It used to be to know someone's name was to have power over them, for if you knew the name of your enemy, you could conjure with it. We already kind of talked about that a little bit. So it goes on. Obviously, I'm not going to read you the whole passage of this. You can go grab a copy of it, read it yourself if you're all that interested. But what I thought was really interesting, and as a person who really enjoys numerology, I thought it was cool that he included this in this particular book, is about like the numerology of your name, and that you might choose a witch name because of the numerology it comes down to. Quick crash course on that if you're not aware. There's a school of thought that you basically make a grid 1 through 9, A through I, J through R, whatever that next letter is, S through Z, which ends on an 8. And then it's kind of like a cipher, sort of a substitution cipher is the word I'm going for, where you're just substituting letters for numbers, and then you do some math and whatever. So it's not for everybody. Not everybody likes math. I like playing with numbers, so I think numerology is pretty cool. And so what he suggests in the book is that when you pick your witch name, if you use letters, if you're happy with the resonance of the numerology of your given name, then you can use those same letters to create your witch name so that you're staying with the same numerology. And he also makes some notes about like the importance of the numerology of your witch name being similar or greater than your birth life path, one of those numbers, forget which one, and I'm not opening the book again, but that the numerology aspect is important. And I can totally see getting into that. I've definitely done some calculations on Serendipity Wyrd versus my, birth name, which is not any great secret. I'm Laura. There you go. And I like my name. I like my given name. I don't have a problem with it. It means victory. I relate to that a lot sometimes. But it's not magical. It is, but it's not. And so I suppose this is a segue where we get into, okay, so why are you Serendipity Wyrd instead of Laura? So, for many of the reasons that I talked about in terms of identity, like I said, I don't use a magical name personally out of protection or to remain in the broom closet or anything. I share all my Serendipity Wyrd stuff to my Facebook profile and everyone knows, right? Like, I'm out. It's cool. But I did, when I was originally starting my YouTube channel, or when I first got the hankering in like late, I think it was 2018, sometime in 2018, I was like, I need a name that I want to like operate on the internet with. I want a witch name. Is kind of what it came down to. And part of that is fueled by the fact that I got on the internet in 1997 when there was like no way would you be using your given name, your legal name, on the internet. It's not a safe place. There are strangers. Protect your information, protect your data, all that good stuff. And that still kind of informs my choices now to some extent. And the cool thing though about having another name, an alternate identity, or what have you, a pseudonym, when you think about it in terms of an alternate identity, that's also this magical act, because by giving yourself another name that you're operating under, at least for me, that gives me a little bit of extra strength and boost to be maybe a little braver. Sometimes, unfortunately, on the internet, we see that go horribly awry, right? Like, people think they're all super anonymous and they're just jerks and buttholes, and it's not cool. And I'm definitely not condoning that. But Laura, particularly little Laura, right? Like, inner child me, is a freaking scaredy pants. Like, total. There's a lot of fear. A lot of fear. And it's really hard sometimes for me to push through that fear in that space, in that identity, in that persona. Which is not, I mean, it's all of me, but. So, having my magical name to step into, it's like putting on a lovely witchy robe, okay? It's like sitting in front of a galaxy image. It's like building a beautiful altar. It gives me this switch into a more magical space, and it takes away some of that, like, rational science, this is all silly, magic's not real, blah 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 blah, inner anti-magic critic. It shuts them the heck up because this is not their place. So I get that there's probably an argument that critics could make around how if you're using a magical name, you're not as like, your credentials aren't provable, but it's magic and witchcraft, and you know how, like, anyway, that's not really a provable thing to start with. But, and like, just anybody can pretend to be anybody, and pretend is a bad thing. On that note, segue again, I would argue that pretend is not a bad thing. Imagination is necessary, especially for freaking magic, yo. You need to be able to tap into your imagination. And you know what? If it takes calling yourself like Twinkle Toes Buttercup, freaking do it. If that helps you be magical, if that helps you tap into your playfulness that you maybe can't get any other way, go for it. I am here to give you permission to go for it. I just need a minute now. Okay, so why, of all of the names, why am I not Twinkle Toes Buttercup? And why am I Serendipity Wyrd? Thank you for asking. It's kind of a fun story. It came about in a couple pieces. Like I said, sometime 2018, 2017, something, my spiritual journey was getting to a point where I was getting poked by spirit, and it was like, hey, do a YouTube channel. And I was like, oh, I'm totally on that. Took me a while, right? But I was like, I need a name. What is my name? What will my name be? Well, rewind. A few years prior, when I was even more of an insecure, like, hide me kind of witch, I was talking to the boyfriend one day, and I was in a lot of like really deep witchy studies, and I was coming to terms with like my divination skills and some things like that, and I kept seeing over and over again notes about, you know, people would talk about like they saw this in a visualization or this, and vision's never been like my first clair. So I got super insecure about whether I even had any witchy gifts, okay? And so I'm talking to the boyfriend who's been my teacher and my companion on this part of my witchy journey. The more like, I don't know, officially witchy. I don't know, I've been witchy my whole life, but then there came the point where I'm like, oh, I'm really studying this. So I was kind of complaining to him, kind of just rambling and just like, I don't know what my witchy gifts are. Like, am I even anything special? Am I even... Do I have any psychic gifts? Right? It was super dramatic. And he just kind of laughed at me in a loving way, in a very kind of, you know, just that kind of like, oh, loved one, you're being silly. And, or at least this is how I remember it. That's not at all how he sounds. But he's like, of course you have a witchy gift. You have serendipity. And I was like, you're right. I do. Because already at that point, there had been many occasions, including meeting him, where I was just in the space I needed to be at the time I needed to be. And I've always had this connection to time as well. In terms of, there have been times I've driven places and there's no reason I should have been on time because I am perpetually late. And somehow I got there early. Like, we had a joke for a while, the husband and I, about like time vortexes. So when the boyfriend said that, and yes, if you are unaware, there's a husband and a boyfriend. Those are their names. Hubsand, boyfriend. That's what we call them. So, when the boyfriend was like, well, you have serendipity, I was like, oh. So that sat there, right? Like some things too. Like you get messages, you get ideas, and they just kind of hang out in your brain for a while. So fast forward a couple of years, I'm trying to figure out a magical name, and I was like, Serendipity. Okay, cool. We have a first name. Awesome. I like it. Let's do that. That relates to like the divination. That relates to like this time thing. Cool. I like it. But I need a last name. Like I want a 2-name name. And I don't know why. I just did. So enter my very first ritual with Hecate. And at this point I'd had a few months of feeling like Hecate was like floating out there. And maybe that was a goddess I'm supposed to work with. And so I had decided that I would have a ritual and I would dedicate myself to my practice, not to any deities. At this point, I already had Loki floating around going, ha ha ha, you're my child, and me going, Loki? No, people say you're not good. No, let's not do that. And I had Freya already come in and like, you are my priestess. And I'm like, we need to get to know each other better because I'm not taking any oaths anytime soon. And then I had this idea about figuring out whether there's a relationship with Hecate. So I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to do this ritual. And I'm going to represent all three of them. And I'm just going to dedicate myself to my practice. Not to any specific deity. Like, yes, I'm inviting them in, but I'm not... This is not a ritual about that. Let me tell you that this ritual, that's another story, and we won't go into all of it. But this ritual did not go that way that I intended. It was not a simple dedication. Every Sunday, I'm going to make sure I've done something witchy. Not at all. Not at all. It went a whole nother, like, initiation sort of direction. It was crazy. But as part of that, after everything kind of wrapped up and I was sitting and I was meditating and I was just being in the energy of this really freaking intense experience I had just had, I heard Serendipity Wyrd float through my head. And I was like, that's it. That is my name. Hail Hecate. Thank you. And it just clicked. When I started studying the Norse stuff, Wyrd was a word I immediately like gravitated to. I was like, oh, that's the word for this thing my whole life, where I've been like, but fate, destiny's kind of a thing, but there's free will, but like, how do you mix those? And like, we can know where we're going and where we're heading, but and then, you know, rational me, of course, the whole time is like, that's all silly. Blah. So it made perfect sense to me that would be part of my name. Because I wander around in the weird. And I go and I collect information. And I look at timelines and go, how do I want the things to happen? And that's a huge part of my witchcraft. Obviously, that needs to be in my name. Duh! Again, Hail Hecate. Thank you very much for my name. So that's how I got the name. Now, why do I use that name? Why do I use it publicly? Because by all means, having a magical name does not mean that anyone else even has to know that. Many people have magical names that they only use in their work with deity or in their magical workings. They may or may not work with deity, and that's super okay, whichever way you go on that. So if I have this magical name and it was granted to me from my perspective from deity in this intense ritual, like, is it okay to use that publicly? obviously I decided it was. In fact, I feel like I was told the name for that reason. So for me, it's okay. It's okay for everybody to know it. It's okay. And it has taken me a lot of shadow work around choosing to use that, because there's so much information out there about use your real name for credible purposes so people can trust you and they know you and you're like a real person and blah blah blah, especially in the arena of career path that I'm in this like coaching, helping, supportive sort of, tarot reading role, right? And it's me though, and I'm gonna just do what I need to do. And what I need to do is to use my magical name, because that helps me do that work. I am better at doing that work if I'm approaching it wearing that name, wearing that identity, than I am if I'm, my mundane self. Not that the two aren't mixed, because they totally are. I know, my aspects or personas are not like separate beings at all. It's just, it's easier with the name. When I'm thinking of myself as Serendipity Wyrd, it is easier to turn on a camera and say a bunch of words, right? And I still deal with a ton of fear. That's why I made a whole video about it. Still deal with a ton of fear, but it helps me. I feel like, oh yeah, I am this amazing witch. I can go use my voice. That's part of what I'm supposed to do. It reminds me of what I feel like my purpose in life is. And if that's what my magical name does for me, and those are the positive benefits it gives me, why wouldn't I use that in my practice? I know for a fact that there are people who think magical names are not only silly, but outright just ridiculous. Like I said, I know there are people who think that immediately cuts your credibility, it's not good in any way, shape, or form. And to them, I'm sorry that that's how they feel, because there's so much magic in using a name, in playing around with that, in deciding for yourself what your identity is, which is the other piece of using Serendipity Wyrd as my identity. Is I've spent my whole life being Laura, who has she, her pronouns, who is a girl, and being very confused by that, knowing that there's something else happening here, and feeling all these like masculine vibes and not knowing how to reconcile that. And at the same time, kind of not caring, because I'm kind of okay with the femme. Well, I'm okay with the femme thing, kind of okay with the being identified as girl thing. So it's like, it would be too much of a hassle to insist that everybody who knows me as Laura use they, them, or whatever pronouns, right? So as Serendipity Wyrd, I also have found more comfort in embracing and sharing the fact that I'm non-binary, and sure, that looks really feminine all the time, and I'm okay with that, and I'm totally okay with she, her pronouns. It's not gonna offend me or anything like that. But I also get to speak to the fact that that's not all I am, that there's more beyond that. Whew. Getting some real Queen of Cups vibes at the moment, thinking about all this, thinking about how the Queen of Cups just can appear so shallow, but there's like all this stuff underneath, and I feel like that so much sometimes. Like, people just look at the surface and go, oh, that's cool. And there's so much more. I guess that's why I have a YouTube channel that I'm actually doing things on now, to tell you all these things. Okay, so we covered, I actually had notes on this, but I think I threw them away in order to just like ramble about it. Wait, found the notes, y'all. I found the notes. Okay, so we talked about why or why not use magical names, that some people feel like it's silly or that it cuts your credibility. I'm sorry to those people. I'm using a magical name, and that's what I'm doing. Um, Choices for why you might use a magical name can have to do with your protection, with not wanting to be out as a witch, not wanting your profession to be affected, not wanting your family to be affected, and feeling like you don't want everybody to know these things. And even if there's not a risk necessarily in your life, you may just feel that your witchcraft practice, your magical practice, whatever words you use for your spirituality, that's just private. And so therefore, people only need to know you as the name that you associate with that private activity. That is not your esoteric adventures, endeavors are not meant for all. So privacy is a totally legit reason. Also, internet handles are a thing. We're used to those. You know, everybody used to be like Soccer Mom 82 or Truck Guy 12 or, you know, Karopi Lover. Not sure why Sanrio characters came to mind, but there we go. And I could go into a whole theory about how I think that Facebook really changed that game, because they, you know, went, hey, real names, like let's put faces to books and names and things. And I think that caused the huge shift in people utilizing handles in their online activities versus their, you know, government issued names. Oh, cool. I'm glad I looked at my notes, because that one I hadn't covered yet. So we've talked a lot about why you use the magical name. I've rambled about why I have mine, how I got mine. So how, if you feel like a magical name is something you want to explore in your own practice, how can you get it together? How can you find your magical name? Like I shared in my story, mine was a combination of, it was gifted, honestly, and both pieces of it were gifted to me. One by somebody I, you know and love very dearly in my day-to-day, life, who exists on this physical plane, and one from an entity who exists in the liminal space. And that is one way that people acquire magical or witchy names. Sometimes it is bestowed upon you. That may be from the gods, deity, spirit. I almost said serpent. You might get your magical name from a serpent. I don't know. It could come from that route. It also could come from, if you're a part of a magical tradition, a witchcraft tradition, it might be a part of that coven or that tradition's process that a priestess bestows upon you a magical name at some point in your initiations or what have you. That happens, and then maybe that's only used within that particular group. And that's a side note I want to talk about as well, because that can be a reason for having a magical name, right? Is that it gives you, if you're in a group of people who are all using magical names, then you're like one of the cool kids who also has a magical name. I do like to think that it has like more importance than just like, being a member of the group, but fitting in and having some of the same things happening in your life that like is what the group does. Like that's part of how human society has kind of done its thing throughout time, so that can be a reason why you have a magical name, is because you're a part of you're a member of some sort of a group in which that is part of the practice. Anyway, so it can come to you from outside. It can come from you from inside. You can do an exploration of yourself. Maybe you make a list of 100 different things that you love, and then you start to narrow it down and go, ooh, I really like galaxies, and I really like amethyst. I'm gonna be Amethyst Galaxy, or something like that. I think I'm just like stepped into Steven Universe for a minute or something. But some common like naming conventions that I've seen in the witchy communities are, sometimes people take on names in initiations, whether those are initiations by spirit or initiations in a group. Talked about that a little bit. Sometimes it's when you feel like you've, kind of leveled up, you've gotten to a different space in your journey. Maybe you outgrew a previous name. And we look to things that we consider magical often, I feel like, to create magical names. So you see a lot of people who use magical names that maybe have different stones or crystals or herbs as a part of it, because we generally those are correspondences we use in our magic. Why wouldn't we use those to name ourselves if we resonate with those particular vibes? You may also just take a name that is generally considered to be a name that maybe you've always loved and adored. Maybe you like the meaning of that particular name. People take magical names to honor their deities or spirits that they work with. There are all sorts of spaces and places and ideas that can inspire your magical name. Try some things out, right? Like, be that like stereotypical like high school girl writing out, Mrs. da 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 or whatever, but obviously use whatever gender terms and titles you may or may not want. But write it out, play with it. If you love amethyst and galaxies and you've decided that's your name, try Galaxy Amethyst, try Amethyst Galaxy, try Amethyst. I don't know. Just play around with it. Becoming. It's the great becoming. Putting together your magical name could be, I'm not going to say should, it could be something that's a lot of fun for you. It could be an interesting exercise. And again, you don't ever have to use this with anybody else. You don't ever have to tell anybody it. You can or not. You can have multiples. Whatever. My phone is going off. Hey y'all, did you know it's a time? That totally derailed me. This video is gonna be so unedited. This is gonna be a mess, but we're choosing not to edit videos right now. Yeah. So, magical names, I think they're freaking awesome. This has been my rant in defense of magical names and letting you know why it is that I use a magical name. If you want to put one together, you can. There is also there are name generators online. You can also randomize some stuff and see if something comes up. What I would suggest is if you think that a magical name is going to help you on your journey, freaking go for it. Yes, there are naysayers. Yes, there are people who think it's silly and childish perhaps and whatever. But if it works for you on your journey and it empowers you, if choosing a magical name is an empowering act for you, freaking go for it. I am here to give you permission. Not that you needed it, but I'm still doing that. Anyway, I'm going to upload this now because I'm a brave little toaster. I love you all. Lots of love. Ah! Mwah! And I will see you next time when I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about the deities I work with. Ooh. Ah! All right. Thanks for watching. If you need a reading, I'm here for you. You can reach out to me. I do all kinds of crazy things with cards and customize spreads to whatever you're looking for. I especially love to read around people's spiritual journeys, helping people find spirit guides and deities that they want to work with and putting those connections together. I love helping people move through shadow work and come to terms with who they are. Identity stuff I love to read about and empower you to be the you that you can be. Okay. Links and stuff in the description on how to follow me, and I will see you next time. Bye!